Toolkits for Practitioners Take Two River Management Society webinar. We're delighted to have you here today for the next hour and a half to delve into the beginner hydropower practitioner toolkit. It's a primer to introduce newcomers to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission licensing process primarily. It also serves as a fantastic reference resource for intermediate and advanced hydropower practitioners as well. My name is Anna Calderon-Cleland, and I'm a fellow working for the National Park Service, specifically in two technical assistance programs, one being the Hydropower Assistance Program and the other the Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. I would say, although I've come to obtain a really solid understanding of the licensing process, and I'm very aware of the power of this Hydropower Licensing 101 toolkit through my fellowships, I'm not an expert in the hydropower licensing process, and I would consider myself a beginner hydropower practitioner with a great appreciation for resources like this toolkit. I will go ahead and pass on the panelist introduction baton to Risa.
Thank you, Anna. So my name is Risa Shimoda. I serve as the Executive Director for the River Management Society. I am familiar with the hydropower licensing process for having worked on a small handful of specific licenses or relicensing projects, and as a volunteer or job-related support team member, I guess, for dozens over the course of 40 years. I've offered the Cliff Notes versions of some of the licenses that you might see on the Hydropower Reform Coalition site or the River Management Society site. They're intended to make it a little bit easier to get the gist of a license or terms. I've also worked with the Hydropower Reform Coalition and the Park Service in developing training webinars and workshops over the last few years, as well as working on some training workshops with FERC, with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. This webinar is the first of 4 this year in RMS's Hydropower Insights webinar series, developed in partnership again with the Park Service and HRC, and the Hydropower Assistance Program for the National Park Service. The toolkit, let's see, our toolkit that we have worked on with the Park Service and also with Kevin Lewis, who is an experienced worker working for the Park Service. It's a kind of a friendly and nicely organized starting point for you if you're beginning to work on new hydropower projects. And hydro mainly that's regulated by the FERC, or and more commonly for projects that are up for renewal after 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It was created for folks who are, go ahead. I know representatives of a number of partners, a number of or agency folks, NGOs, a few academics, and some folks who are studying hydropower as an alternate source of energy. Subject matter experts. We have worked with a few who are working on more academic or research projects as well, but mainly this kind of group. So what's involved in the toolkit? Here's a picture of some folks getting together on the Klamath River. In order to become a confident practitioner, there's several core competencies or areas of expertise that we're hoping that you will study, become familiar with, at least conversant enough so that you know how to look up something to help you out. There's 6 primary areas of proficiency: the licensing process, regulatory roles, operations like the operations and economics of different types of facilities, collaboration and negotiation specific to hydropower work, understanding natural, cultural, and recreational resources. We'll go into all this. And then also community engagement and separately accessibility components as they relate to the campus or like trails around dams. So when you go to our website and also the HRC website that you'll see later, you'll see this block of six buttons. And there, each button is labeled the topics I just mentioned. So this is on the Toolkit page when you go to the River Management Society website, resources, hydropower, and then on the first button that you'll see is Hydropower 101 Toolkit. So you can click on any of these buttons in whatever order you like. We're going to go through all six of them. So the landing page, it also includes some kind of friendly words of wisdom from Kevin Lewis, actually, who has worked on many relicensing projects before you get started to kind of get you in the mindset of working on this. If you're here, you know that hydropower relicensing is kind of obscure, something that you wouldn't necessarily want to do as a hobby. And when you are going to start working on hydropower, you kind of have to jump in kind of waist deep immediately, right? So before you jump in, some words of wisdom about, just how you should think about approaching this really complex system. We have lots of hyperlinks to on our website in the River Training Channel to 15 different recordings about some topics that we're going to be talking about today and others. We have the Cliff Note summaries. We also have now the licensing process offers an overview of the most common paths to establishing a license. The regulatory roles describes the FERC and the other laws, regulations, and policies from various agencies. They're all represented today. It's really exciting to see all you guys here today. The facility types differentiates between pump storage, hydrokinetics, and traditional, have a dam and you go to the powerhouse or you generate power right there. And then also the economics that are alluded to by all of those. Also, the collaboration negotiation skills that will help you succeed working with a variety of hydropower stakeholders. And you can learn about addressing the different types of natural, cultural, recreational resources. Finally, the community engagement and accessibility underscore the importance of community involvement and also tribal government engagement, which we kind of go into a little bit. Through these pages, you can find helpful hyperlinks to external pages, websites, and resources to increase your understanding of each of these topics and links to tools that are helpful when navigating the process. Before Anna walks through the first key things that we'd like you to know about as a hydropower participant, we want to try your how you feel about a little poll that we're going to launch. So get ready to tell us how much you know about some trivia here. Okay, here we go. How many hydropower projects are expected for relicensing in the next 10 years? Give you another couple of seconds. So we have 15 out of 22 people have responded. 16.
And the
Okay.
options are 1,000 plus around that number, a little lower, and then a lowermost in the low hundreds. So use your
Okay.
intuition.
Okay, here we go. What did we see?
All right, 5% answered 1,000 plus, 60% answered 501 through 999, and 35% of respondents answered 200 through 500. The correct answer is actually that central 501, or so sorry, it is actually 200 to 500, the lowermost number. So 35% of folks got that number correct. The source for this is the FERC expected relicensing fiscal year 2025 through 2039, a spreadsheet available on the FERC website. Thank you all for
Cool.
answering.
Okay. You're up,
All
Anna.
right. Thank you. Um, so because FERC hydropower licenses can last for around 30 to 50-year periods of time, participating in the hydropower licensing process can be lengthy and complicated, but it can also have a really significant lasting impact. Hydropower licensing allows for kind of a once in a lifetime, once in a generation opportunity to engage in the licensing process and improve hydropower operations to benefit surrounding natural, cultural, and recreational resources, and also to potentially mitigate adverse impacts from preceding years of hydropower operations in the area. So we have a few tips that are contained in the Hydropower Licensing 101 Toolkit for engaging in the licensing process. The first is to establish your role. It's really important to have a solid understanding of your objectives in the licensing process so that you're prepared to articulate and advocate for what outcomes you would like to see in the final license for the project that you're participating in. The second is to build relationships. Because the licensing process takes many years, it is critical to develop cordial or positive working relationships with the other people involved in the licensing process. There will likely be people around the table with different opinions and objectives, both among the participants and also the license applicant. And the ability to communicate and reach resolution between the different participating entities is really dependent on relationship building and trust. The third tip in the hydropower licensing toolkit is to find a mentor. Harnessing the knowledge and experience of other hydropower practitioners is critical, especially if you're navigating the licensing process for the first time as a beginner hydropower practitioner. There are so many folks in, for example, the RMS community who have a wealth of knowledge that you could connect with. The fourth tip is to prepare to negotiate. Compromise is a really critical element throughout the licensing process. It's really important to be able to clearly and strongly articulate elements that are important to you and your objectives in negotiations, while simultaneously also navigating your priorities in the landscape of other participant objectives and their ideal outcomes. The ability to negotiate and compromise is particularly important in a settlement agreement, which is a component of the licensing process that we'll touch on shortly. The fifth tip is to apply your project management skills in organizing and planning around deadlines and the steps of the relicensing process. The next tip is to hone your writing, verbal, and communication skills and utilize things like social media and informal communication networks to engage your community and stakeholders effectively. The last tip is to pace yourself. The process usually takes at least 5 years, so there's substantial time to familiarize yourself with the process, project area, and potential issues that may arise during the project. So the first of the 6 primary core competencies in the toolkit that Risa discussed previously is on the licensing process. If you were to click on this licensing process grid box outlined in red on the RMS website in the toolkit page, the website would take you to the toolkit subpage on the licensing process. In the next several slides, we'll provide a very high-level overview of the licensing process, which the toolkit covers in much greater depth, and highlight just a few of the resources around the licensing process that are contained in the toolkit. As a very quick high-level overview of the key components of the FERC hydropower licensing process, non-federal hydroelectric project facility owners obtain licenses from FERC in order to be able to produce hydropower, with those licenses lasting between 30 to 50 years. If a license is issued for the first time at a hydropower project, it's referred to as an original license. And if the hydropower project has been operating under past licenses, subsequent licensing processes are referred to as relicensing. Due to the lengthy duration of these license terms, the need to take into account natural, cultural, and recreational resources, and all of the different agencies and organizations that participate, the licensing process is extremely complex and often lasts 5 years or more, depending on the complexity of the project site. So the licensing process includes 2 main phases, beginning with the pre-filing period activity, which starts with a notice of intent, also called an NOI, a preliminary application document, or a PAD, and involves information gathering to inform the content of the license application. The second phase is called the post-filing period, which begins when the final license application is submitted by the licensee. During this post-filing period, after submission of the final license application, FERC evaluates the application, develops environmental documents like the National Environmental Policy Act or NEPA environmental document, and makes a decision through issuing its final license order. The FERC process also includes kind of like quasi-legal proceedings, including interventions, trial-type hearings, and rehearings. There are several points during the licensing process during which participants can formally intervene to establish legal standing if you wish to participate in responding to a FERC decision. Settlements or settlement agreements are often created between the licensee and different parties involved in the licensing process. The agreement is filed with FERC, and the final license may include terms and conditions from the settlement agreement, which FERC then has the legal authority to impose. But the remaining settlement items that FERC has no role in overseeing or enforcing stand as a legal contract between the signatories of the agreement for the life of the license or for a different, shorter agreed upon term. Lastly, once a license is issued, the licensee is responsible for implementation of the license articles in the license and for fulfilling their obligations in the license. If the licensee created a settlement agreement with other parties, the licensee is also responsible for implementing those provisions in the settlement agreement. Another component is that a licensee can seek amendments to the license throughout the license term. If you'd like to become more familiar with the licensing process, there are fantastic resources on the Toolkit page for the licensing process, including guides from FERC and the Hydropower Reform Coalition. FERC offers two primary licensing process pathways to licensees. Their default licensing process is the integrated licensing process, also called the ILP, in which FERC engages and initiates that NEPA process early and oversees and determines which specific environmental studies are needed. This flowchart is a very high-level overview of the pre- and post-filing stages in the integrated licensing process. We won't go into the details of the licensing process steps in this webinar, but we just wanted to share this flowchart with you all to illustrate how complex the licensing process is and to emphasize that the toolkit is an extremely helpful and more easily digestible reference guide to navigating this process. So for more resources on how to navigate all of these steps, the licensing process page of the toolkit has a simplified version of this flowchart for the ILP and is a fantastic resource. The second type of FERC licensing process that is described in the toolkit licensing process page is the traditional licensing process, also called the TLP, which is the non-default process type. To be able to use this TLP, FERC has to approve a license applicant's request to do so. The TLP is used fairly frequently, often for smaller, less complex projects, requiring the least amount of engagement with stakeholders during the pre-filing stage before the license is filed with FERC. The NEPA process also begins later in this TLP with the public NEPA scoping process to identify issues initiated in the post-filing stage. So although this flowchart of steps for the traditional licensing process is slightly less complex than that for the integrated licensing process, both of these types are complex enough that the toolkit is a major help to understand and navigate these steps with confidence and clarity. So similarly to resources on the ILP in the toolkit, there's a simplified flowchart for this TLP in the toolkit as well. So before Risa gives us an overview of what the regulations and regulatory rules section of the toolkit contains, we wanted to bring up a second poll question for you all.
Can you see it now?
It is not showing up on
Okay.
my end.
Try it again.
And this second poll question, once it comes up, is on what percentage of total hydropower generation do non-federal hydropower projects regulated by FERC produce? You can start brainstorming what percentage you think that is while we bring it up.
Well, I think that we're going to have to put the answers in the chat.
That sounds good. So, folks, the question to put your question answer in the chat for is what percentage of total hydropower generation do non-federal hydropower projects that are regulated by FERC produce? The answer options that were in the poll is about 67%, about 51%, and about 15%. So the answer options are 67, 51, and 15%. Seeing some answers come into the chat. All right. So the correct answer is that it's about 51% of total hydropower generation is produced by non-federal hydropower projects that are regulated by FERC. All right. And now, Risa, I will pass on the presentation baton to you.
Thank you, Anna. So on to the next square in our series of six. So regulation, regulatory roles, as you can imagine, there are many rivers that have hydropower dams on them, with which another federal agency or state agency is involved. So the second of the six, if you were to click on this, it will take you to another toolkit subpage, like the licensing process. And here you can see some of the types of agencies that might be involved, and you might work for them. So this process and these elements, if the process offers the backbone and skeleton of FERC, this section is kind of the beating heart and infrastructure, all the other folks who get involved in the process. FERC authorization is required for non-federal hydropower projects. Could be located on navigable waters, could be located on federal land, using water from a federal dam, or this is a little in the weeds, but if it's constructed after 1935, located on a non-navigable stream that affects the interests of interstate or foreign commerce, like the provision of power to an interstate power grid. FERC is responsible for administering, planning, and supporting hydropower. So this includes the licensing, which you've heard most about. But if you've been involved, you also know that administration and compliance includes anything related to the land, engineering, environmental, aquatic resources, all those components of what goes on the campus. And then finally, dam safety and inspection. This is super important, but different type of work involved with OSHA and engineering and building and that kind of stuff. Finally, FERC has several administrative enforcement and record keeping roles, issuing the license, evaluating study plans and doing the study plan determinations, quasi-legal proceedings like Anna mentioned, maintaining all of the administrative records, leading NEPA where it's often necessary, and enforcing the license conditions, enforcing dam safety and environmental compliance. That's a lot. And finally, the governing laws and policies are also really important, and we have links to them. These might also sound familiar. Federal Power Act, updates to the Federal Power Act that have taken place over several decades, Clean Water Act, NEPA, and Tribal Trust Responsibility. There are others, but those are kind of the big ones. And finally, the Hydropower Reform Coalition resource library, which we'll take a look at later, is an excellent resource for information examples of precedent-setting court cases, policies related to the licensing process that are common, important, ones that are handy to be able to look up quickly. And we'll go through those at the end of the webinar. So back to you, Anna.
Thank you. So let's move on to the next core competency in the toolkit, which is on facility types, operations, and economics. This section explores how the different hydropower facility generation types function and explains how economics, power prices, and markets function in the context of hydropower. So this page of the toolkit delves into the specifics of hydropower facility types and also contains links to a lot of helpful external resources on these facility types, like a Department of Energy Energy 101 hydropower video explaining how hydropower works and research and development efforts in the field. This section of the toolkit also has diagrams illustrating how each hydropower facility type functions. Generally, hydropower technologies generate power by using elevation difference, referred to as head, between a dam or diversion structure and a powerhouse location. The amount of power generated is a combination of the head and the water flow, which is the amount of water available. The first type of hydropower facility explored in the toolkit is conventional hydropower, which uses a dam or a diversion structure to direct water to a powerhouse downstream at the base of the dam or even further downstream. Conventional hydropower is the most common type of hydropower generating facility. These projects are either constructed with an impoundment structure, which uses a dam to create a reservoir and penstocks to direct water to a powerhouse at the base of the dam, like the image to the left, or like the image to the right, they're constructed with a diversion structure, which uses a smaller dam and diverts water through tunnels, canals, or pipelines to a powerhouse further downstream. The next type of hydropower facility described in the toolkit is pumped storage, which stores energy in its operation and essentially functions like a giant battery. Although pump storage facilities don't generate quote unquote new electricity by harnessing energy from the flow of water, pumped storage allows for shifting power generation based on demand for electricity and on pricing fluctuations. Pumped storage facilities operate by pumping water from a lower reservoir to a higher reservoir during a low energy demand time period, and then release water back down to the lower reservoir to spin a power generating turbine when there's higher energy demand. The last hydropower facility type explored in the toolkit is called hydrokinetic energy, which is a relatively new and largely experimental technology currently that produces electricity through harnessing kinetic energy from the motion of a body of water. Hydrokinetic power facilities could harness energy from tides, waves, ocean currents, and free-flowing rivers, for example. The left-hand image illustrates different ocean wave and ocean current hydrokinetic power structures, whereas the image to the right illustrates a hydrokinetic facility that captures energy from a river or a stream. So before Risa shares out an overview of the contents of the collaboration and negotiation section of the toolkit, we wanted to ask you our final poll question of the webinar. And Risa, I would be happy to read aloud the question and we could answer them in the chat if that would be easiest, or whichever.
Let's try this again.
That's good.
Yeah, I think you're going to have to ask the
No
question.
worries. Yeah, the question, and you all can put your answer in the chat, is which is the largest active FERC licensed hydropower project? The answer options that you can put in the chat include Shoshone Falls on the Snake River in Idaho, Robert Moses Niagara on the Niagara River in New York, and then Holcomb on the Chippewa River in Wisconsin. So those are your three answer options. And we'll give you all a moment to put your answer in the chat.
Largest, the amount of megawatts or amount of water or both?
Megawatts, yes. Largest in terms of power generation. All right, seeing some more answers trickle in. We'll give you all another second. All right. So the correct answer is the Robert Moses Niagara on the Niagara River in New York. It comes in at 2,755 megawatts approximately based on the FERC complete list of active licenses spreadsheet on the FERC website, last updated on March 10th of this year. Thank you all for indulging us in another trivia question.
Oh, Anna, what's the capacity of the other ones?
Oh, sure. Let me bring that up. One moment.
Just for those
I
who are,
believe there's a range. Yes. Let's see here. I might have to put it in the chat later, but
okay,
I will put the megawatts of each in the chat. Yes.
just for those who
Um,
picked the other one.
oh, absolutely. Yes. All right.
Okay, we're
Lisa,
going
go
to
ahead
go
and
on
pass
to
it on to
number
you.
4, collaboration and negotiation. This is pretty important, as you already know. So this fourth area actually will be familiar to you, but also will serve you even beyond your hydro work. We offer a description of skills and that are important in navigating relationship dynamics, partnerships, collaboration with other participants, interest groups, agencies, and entities involved in the licensing process, whose perspectives will vary considerably. If you worked for 10 minutes on a hydropower project, you already know this. Now, the skills, there are several skills that you may already possess, articulated in the context of the hydropower licensing process, and are addressed in the toolkit. For strategic relationship development with licensees and other participants, not having a sense for who your friends and enemies are, if you want to call them that, who will be around the table, is so important before you walk in the room. Negotiation and mediation skills and techniques. These are fantastic, whether you're a mom and dad talking with your kids, or a parent talking with the teachers, or talking with people across the table in a relicensing project. Another is general communication skills. Um, important, project management, always important for anything that we do, but particularly not just helpful, but really important in working on a relicensing. Communication skills, of course, written, verbal, anything that allows you to have the other person understand what you're telling them in the manner that you intended to share that information. And then finally, understanding relevant historical, geographical, and social components of inequity in the project area, whether it's in an urban area or in way out in the country, whoever's there has been impacted by this project for a long time. And unless you delve into it, you probably don't know how the impact has been sitting in that community. So there's many considerations to take into account when you're working on with or as part of these different types of interest groups. Understand the authority, obligations, limits, and roles of federal, state, local agencies involved in your project, because they're all quite different. Become familiar with the recreation activities in and around the project area, including upstream and downstream of the campus. And this includes um, activity that might not be there yet, but has been talked about. Next, the tribal trust and consultation responsibilities of FERC and other federal agencies with those who have treaties and treaty rights that apply to the project area. And engaging meaningful partnership relationship building with the community groups and the organizations. So this comes into anyone who is in any group who cares anything about that project. They really should be listened to. And it's FERC is charged with allowing any of these groups to participate. They're not required to go after anybody. So it's sort of up to all these entities to claim a seat at the table, and then they can have one.
Thank you, Risa. The second to last element in the toolkit is natural, cultural, and recreational resources. This section of the toolkit describes the different priorities or mandated obligations that tribes and indigenous communities, NGOs, and the public and agencies can have in terms of resource protections. It describes the different types of natural, cultural, and recreational resources that can be found in a project area. Rivers and watersheds can have a vast array of natural, cultural, and recreational resources that are really critical to identify and, if possible, protect during the licensing process. The toolkit page on this topic has a lot of hyperlinked helpful resources and reference pages on quantifying and identifying these resources and their features, and on what types of resource experts or sources to consult when navigating resources. So identifying, respecting, and protecting these resources is critical in the hydropower licensing process, and monitoring, measuring, and reporting on resource statuses is critical across all types of resources. Different practitioners can have different priorities or mandated obligations in the licensing process in reference to resources. Practitioners from tribes or indigenous communities may utilize indigenous knowledge and resource specialist expertise relevant to tribal interests and may prioritize potential impacts on traditional uses and treaty rights. Practitioners from NGOs or from the public may prioritize mission-related expertise and understand and develop allies to advocate on behalf of the public. Practitioners from land management agencies, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, or Fish and Wildlife agencies may prioritize and focus on resources that are more relevant for mission and management requirements, for example. These are a few types of aquatic resources on the left and terrestrial resources on the right that could be considered throughout the licensing process. In terms of the examples listed for aquatic resources, there's water quality and temperature, hydrologic processes and in-stream flows, aquatic organism passage, aquatic invasive species, or aquatic or riparian species habitat. On the right, wildlife, botany and vegetation communities, fire and wildfire, and land use are terrestrial resource considerations. Other resource types are cultural, recreational, and aesthetic resources. Moving from the left-hand column to the right-hand column are examples of cultural resources like historic resources, traditional cultural uses, and areas of potential effect. Recreational resource considerations like recreational flows, river and reservoir accessibility, recreation facilities, and education and interpretation. And then lastly, aesthetic resource considerations like visual resources, dark sky and night sky, soundscape, and aesthetic flows. And back to you, Risa.
Okay, so community engagement, and then it's quite a separate topic, related but separate topic, accessibility. So this little button will take you to that page on our website. And this is super high level. I'll explain a little bit about what you'll find there. So hydropower projects affect local and regional communities, as we mentioned, as well as people who'll be traveling to the site to experience recreation or other resources in the project area. It's important to foster active participation of community members at the very least, because the terms of the license will impact them for a generation or more. So this section describes the role of FERC licensing and how to encourage community participation, and notably the importance of collaborating with tribal governments. RMS and the National Park Service has provided a thoughtfully extensive review of access and accessibility at hydropower project sites. The drop-down menus offer legal requirements, planning and design advice, applying best practices for protection, mitigation, and access enhancement during the licensing process, and examples of accessibility-minded trails built around dam projects. To ensure meaningful involvement in the licensing process, you may need to, as I mentioned before, you may need to initiate their involvement. The hydropower licensing process allows for contribution and participation of community-based organizations, local and federal agencies, tribal governments, and no one is going to bang on any doors to force them to add their voice. So it's sort of up to everybody to know that they're able to be involved, and then to ask to become involved. As a participant in the licensing process, considering the following to the extent that is practical. Encourage meaningful community involvement in the process by collaborating with community leaders and decision makers. Find out who they are. Find out who is in the group. Find out who the decision makers, whether they attend meetings or not, but know that they're the people who are going to want to voice their opinions. with tribes, get to know and understand their relationships to the project sites to encourage their early and meaningful involvement. Their life-sustaining traditions, historical and cultural knowledge predates the building of the first dam by a lot, probably, and by a number with many zeros after it in terms of numbers of years. Few of us truly have an understanding of what they can contribute to the process, and relationship building requires special care and greater effort in the development of pride through the relationships of the process. So again, it's us, if you're involved, encouraging others to become involved and establish an understanding of what might be in their background or what they're bringing to the table. Just an aside, if you're interested in the involvement of tribal folks, our fourth webinar in the series on June 10th is entitled Tribes and Evolving Processes Hydropower Practitioners. And you'll learn from a panelist from the National Indigenous Coalition of Hydropower, which is a newly formed collaboration of hydropower practitioners from tribes across the country. Now, when considering impacts from the hydropower projects and what they have on the communities, review innovative approaches to project area accessibility for on-water recreation and general public visitation to hydropower campuses. I'll go back to you, Anna.
Thank you so much. So now that you all kind of have an overview of what the contents of the toolkit are and the power of the toolkit and how to navigate the pages of the toolkit on the RMS page, we wanted to show you how to navigate the pages of the toolkit on the Hydropower Reform Coalition page, since the toolkit is available on both the River Management Society and the Hydropower Reform Coalition websites. So this image is of the landing page of the toolkit on the River Management Society website page. And then as you've seen on the previous slides, this grid of 6 cells is how the toolkit subpages are represented on the River Management Society toolkit landing page when you're on their website. To show you how to navigate to the toolkit on the Hydropower Reform Coalition website, this is a screenshot of the homepage of the HRC site. To the upper right-hand corner of this slide and on the web page are drop-down menus. If you go to the licensing drop-down menu, you can see that the 6 core competency categories appear in the white clickable column in this screenshot below the Intro to Licensing option at the top. So if you click that Intro to Licensing drop-down option outlined in red, you'll be taken to the page on the next slide, which is the landing page of the toolkit as it's represented on the Hydropower Reform Coalition website. So as you can see, the content of the 6 core competencies at the bottom is the same across both the River Management Society website and the Hydropower Reform Coalition website, but there's some slight title differences. And then also due to web design differences, the landing pages do appear significantly stylistically different when you compare the two sites. But it's important to note that the content is mirrored across both. So this is how the spread of those 6 cells appears on the bottom of the HRC website's toolkit landing page. The categories are the same with those slightly different titles and are represented in the same order. So this is how the first core competency spread appears on the Hydropower Reform Coalition website. In the next slide, we'll show kind of a side-by-side view of this page of the toolkit on regulations and regulatory rules in the RMS website view and the HRC website view to illustrate the differences between the two toolkit layouts and associated resources in the two websites. So this is the side-by-side view of the regulations and regulatory rules pages of the toolkit in both websites, with the River Management Society website view on the left and the Hydropower Reform Coalition website view on the right. So there's 2 key differences to note here in their layouts. So the first key difference is that in the River Management Society toolkit page, there are these blue boxes, if you can see my cursor on the left-hand image, that function as a drop-down menu that you have to expand in order to see these bullets below. Whereas on the HRC site, all of the text is listed without any drop-down functions within the page, as you can see on the right-hand side. The second key difference is that On the far right-hand side of the Regulations and Regulatory Rules page on the HRC website, there's a vertical column titled Related Resources, which contains relevant resources in the HRC database to the contents of the toolkit page, in this case on regulations and regulatory rule resources. For example, there's a guidance document for federal departments and agencies on incorporating Indigenous knowledgeways into their research, policy, and decision making. You can navigate to this Hydropower Reform Coalition resource database tool by clicking the Resources tab at the very top of their website, which is highlighted in red. So to briefly cover the power of the HRC resource database that's attached to the toolkit comes from the ability to search for resources by entering keywords, by clicking topic boxes, and by filtering by publication date range. So for example, if you wanted to look at all of the 21 licensing process resources in the database, you can click that licensing process checkbox, which is highlighted in that red outline. If you wanted to look specifically at example filings and case studies relating to the licensing process, you can click both checkboxes to further filter down, for example. And that concludes our webinar on the power of the Hydropower 101 Toolkit. And while we open up the floor for questions, we wanted to encourage audience members to fill out the survey that's about to be placed in the chat. To provide feedback to help us continue to provide high quality and relevant information for you and your fellow hydropower practitioners. So thank you all. And now we'll open up the floor for questions.
I've just put the URL to the survey in the chat, and it'll have you pick which session you're attending and a little bit of input so that we can get your feedback. And if you have if you have an idea for what you would love to learn as a new hydropower practitioner or seasoned one, please let us know.
Right, and please feel free to add questions in the chat or use the raise hand feature or go ahead and unmute.
Um, yeah, I just wanted to say great job to both of you guys. Really a great presentation. And I also thought I could put a link to the chat to the other previous webinars too, which I think you guys shared too, but they're also great resources that help just build out some of these elements that Risa and Anna shared about.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you for attending. Well, we'll give you another minute to fill out. Oh, thank you. Fill out the survey. Just a little plug for the next in our series. The very next one will be something that no one who is building the first hydropower dam ever thought about. But it was dealing with aquatic invasive species management, whether it's fish, plants, or mussels. And we will have a pretty awesome group that's been that we have met through Susan Pasca, who's the aquatic invasive species executive secretary for all the federal agencies. And these folks work in New England or for Duke Power or for the Army Corps of Engineers or Idaho Power. And they're going to tell us about prevention, some of their nightmares, how they've learned to manage the various aquatic invasive species. And we'll open it up for discussion for folks who have similar situations as theirs. So that's, if you've signed up for the series, you should see a notice for all of the subsequent sessions on April 29th, and then we'll be talking about the energy options in the grid, and then the final one in June on this tribal group that is just formed. If you also have questions afterwards, because you were overwhelmed with all this great information, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us.
Absolutely. And then somebody asked for the link to the HRC resource database that we demonstrated towards the end of the presentation. I responded to that comment in the chat with a link to that resource page for those folks who are interested.
Any other questions? Gosh, Anna, we got through this in record time. So please don't hesitate to ask any questions, even if you think that they're kind of basic or even any clarification for something that we covered. Also, if you are not a beginner, but you have been doing hydropower relicensing for a while, and the material that we covered was familiar, please remember what we've been talking about so you can share it with friends, colleagues who might, even a volunteer who might be absolutely terrified of going to the FERC website. You know, this could help someone like that a lot. I'm going to stop the recording, but we'll stay on here